World Meeting of Families. As the International Summit kicks off in Dublin, the Vatican sheds light on the Pope's plan in the sex abuse crisis. Nazi guard deported. The U.S. takes action on a man who worked at a concentration camp during World War II. Kavanaugh on Capitol Hill. The latest in the hearings on the president's pick for the Supreme Court. And a new lawsuit against the Colorado baker, Jack Phillips. We'll have analysis. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 21st, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. An abuse survivor in Ireland is responding to the Holy Father's letter to Catholics around the world on clergy sex abuse ahead of the Pope's upcoming visit to the Catholic country later this week. In a tweet, Maury Collins writes, "Statements from the Vatican or Pope should stop telling us how terrible abuse is and how all must be held accountable. Tell us instead what you are doing to hold them accountable. That is what we want to hear. Working on it is not an acceptable explanation for decades of delay." Collins was on the Vatican Commission for Protecting Minors. She quit in 2017 over frustration that no progress was being made. Collins was abused by a priest as a child. Tracy Harkin is with EWTN Ireland and will be hosting EWTN's coverage of the World Meeting of Families this week. She joins us from Dublin. Marie Collins told our Lauren Ashburn in a recent interview with News Nightly that the church is obsessed with secrecy, and she finds it a huge impediment to moving forward. So Tracy, how are other Catholics in Ireland reacting to the Pope's statement?
I think, Wyatt, there's a general consensus of welcome for what the Pope has said in his recent statement. It's been big news over the last day or so in our media, in our talk shows. One bishop, Bishop Alan McGuckin, Bishop of Raphoe, was on a show this morning, and he again was welcoming the statement by Pope Francis, but very much a recognition, both within the church and outside of the church, that there needs to be concrete steps put in place to make sure, especially Vatican accountability, for example, has been called into question. You know, what are the protocols that will follow this apology? So very much a feeling that, yes, apology, of course, is welcome. Pope Francis is generally seen as a sincere pope, a good pope, a well-meaning pope. But what people are saying within the Catholic world and outside in the wider secular media is that much more needs to be done, and there's very much an expectation and a hope that Pope Francis will really address this and go much further than his statement in his 36-hour visit to Ireland this weekend.
Let's follow up on that. The Vatican said today that Pope Francis is expected to meet with victims of sexual abuse during his weekend visit to Ireland and speak out about the problem. In your view, what does he need to say to restore credibility?
I think what people are looking for is to go beyond an apology to actually concrete steps. Mandatory reporting has been suggested. Here in the diocese that I'm in at the moment, in Dublin, the Archdiocese of Dublin, this diocese is seen actually as a leader within the church and within wider society in terms of the child protection safeguards. So the church in Ireland is also very keen to point out that we have very strict protocols, including mandatory reporting. It's also recognised, Wyatt, that in the Pope's statement, he mentioned for the first time, he referred to this abuse and the neglect by hierarchy to report it as actually a crime. So that's also been recognised as going further than previous statements, but again, not far enough.
The World Meeting of Families begins this evening. Give us some of the highlights for the week ahead.
Well, the World Meeting of Families officially begins this evening in the 26 dioceses throughout Ireland. In our major cathedrals, there is evening prayer which will be celebrated. There will be bells ringing throughout the country, and that also includes non-Catholic Christian denominations. We're hoping that they will join in that. And it really is a packed programme. We have the 3-day Congress, which with speakers, workshops, all of course surrounding the theme of marriage and family and God's plan for love and life and all those beautiful themes that accompany Amoris. And also, of course, the highlight will be Saturday and Sunday when Pope Francis himself arrives on Irish shores for the very first time.
Okay, and as we mentioned, EWTN will be covering that all week long and throughout the weekend. Tracy Harkin with EWTN Ireland, thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Prosecutors say a hotline set up to report sexual abuse in Pennsylvania's Catholic dioceses have received more than 400 calls over the past week. The state's Attorney General's office says agents are investigating the calls. If you would like to report abuses in the Pennsylvania diocese mentioned in last week's grand jury report, the number to call is 888-538-8541. Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, also under fire in the wake of the sex abuse scandal, says the crisis is the result of the sins and failures of clergy.
We remain shamed by these egregious failures to protect children and those who are vulnerable, and affirm our commitment that these failures will never be repeated.
O'Malley is the head of the Vatican's Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. The video was posted over the weekend in response to the Pennsylvania grand jury report. A priest says he wrote a letter in 2015 to O'Malley about what he called inappropriate behavior by Archbishop Theodore McCarrick, accused of abusing minors and adult seminarians. O'Malley says he did not personally receive that letter. The president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is also reacting to the Pope's words. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo writes in part, "On behalf of my brother bishops, I offer that only by confronting our own failure in the face of crimes against those we are charged to protect can the Church resurrect a culture of life where the culture of death has prevailed." Joining me now is Dawn Eden Goldstein, author of My Peace I Give You, Healing Sexual Wounds with the Help of the Saints. Dawn is a theology professor at Holy Apostles College and Seminary in Cromwell, Connecticut, and she's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Dawn, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Tell us about your story of conversion, because you converted from Judaism, and how did you come to the faith?
Well, I came to the faith in 2005. I had first become a Protestant in 1999, and in between there was the scandal in 2002. And one of the things that was preventing me from entering the church was concern, as a survivor of sexual abuse, that the church had these scandals. And for me, what helped me to overcome my difficulties with entering the Catholic Church was seeing faithful Catholics who were themselves angry, furious over the abuse, and wanting the church to purify herself and to enact appropriate reforms. Seeing that people in the Catholic Church really cared about what was going on, wanted these evils to come to the light, helped me to see that it really was Christ's church.
And we should clarify, when you were sexually abused as a child, it was not by a priest, but it was in a house of worship, a Jewish temple.
That's right. It was by a janitor at the temple, and it was covered up. My mother complained to the rabbi, and he did nothing. So I could certainly identify with victims of clergy abuse.
You write extensively about the healing process. Tell us about the role of the saints and how they've helped you.
Well, I think that the number one thing that the saints can help a survivor with is overcoming the wound of misplaced guilt. Too often, survivors of abuse blame themselves for the evils that were perpetrated on them, evils for which they're in no way responsible. No abuse victim is ever responsible for his or her abuse. So when we hear about saints who suffered abuse and found healing in Christ, then we see that, gosh, if this person suffered something like what I suffered, and this person is in heaven, then I'm not responsible for my abuse, and perhaps the way that I handle my wounds and offer them to our Lord in union with His can actually help to bring me closer to heaven. What was evil is still evil, but God can bring good out of the effects of it.
The Pope is traveling to Ireland. What do you want to hear from him?
I want to hear from him that he is specifically going to hold bishops accountable. I think that everyone who's concerned about the abuse wants to see that. Perhaps he hasn't said that yet because he's waiting to get the facts in, but I hope we'll hear something from him about that very soon.
Obviously, so many of us will be praying on the issue. What further advice would you have to victims of abuse?
Oh, I would say don't give up on our Lord. Don't give up on the Eucharist. Don't give up on the sacrament of confession. Again, no survivor is responsible for his or her abuse. But the more that we purify our hearts, the stronger our prayer life will be and the better our healing will be.
Such an important message and important testimony. Dawn Eden Goldstein, theology professor at Holy Apostles College and Seminary and author of My Peace I Give You, Healing Sexual Wounds with the Help of the Saints. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Jewish groups are expressing satisfaction after a former Nazi camp guard, Yaki Pauli, was deported from the U.S. to Germany today.
That's really the maximum that the American authorities can do. In other words, they can't try the people for their crimes overseas because the crimes were committed outside the United States and the victims were not Americans.
Zuroff, the director of a Jewish human rights organization, says he's pleased with the deportation. Pauli was stripped from his U.S. citizenship in 2003 after lying to the U.S. government of his Nazi involvement. It took 14 years to remove him from the U.S. Microsoft undercovers Russian efforts to hack U.S. political groups ahead of the midterm elections. Russian officials dismiss the claims as unfounded and say it isn't clear how they could distort the U.S. electoral system. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. That comes as the White House announces President Trump's plans to embark on the campaign trail this fall, promoting Republican candidates. The president is already forecasting results in November's midterm elections.
I think we're going to have much more of a red wave than what you're going to see as a phony blue wave. Blue wave means crime. It means open borders. Not good.
That prediction as new concerns arise over Russian cyber attacks targeting U.S. political groups. Microsoft says hackers linked to the Russian government created fake websites mimicking two conservative think tanks and the U.S. Senate. The goal, to trick victims into installing malicious software. National security officials have confirmed Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election and say the cyber threats will continue ahead of the midterm elections. Today on Capitol Hill, senators questioned Trump administration officials if Russian sanctions will keep the Kremlin from interfering.
They're still doing the same things that they've been doing for years. Have we seen any behavior change as a result of what it is we're doing?
By the net weight of our actions and sanctions in particular, I think we are forcing the Russians, and specifically Putin, to reconsider his preferred strategy.
Both of the conservative groups targeted have been critical of President Vladimir Putin. Tonight, one of those groups, the International Republican Institute, is responding. This latest attempt is consistent with the campaign of meddling that the Kremlin has waged against organizations that support democracy and human rights. It is clearly designed to sow confusion, conflict, and fear among those who criticize Mr. Putin's authoritarian regime. Microsoft says this hacking group tied to the Russian government has previously used similar fake sites to infect computers and steal information. Microsoft President Brad Smith says these threats are targeting both sides of the aisle and are designed to disrupt and influence our democracy. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. First Lady Melania Trump is heading to Africa to visit several countries. She'll travel there in October, and it will be her first major solo trip since becoming First Lady. Mrs. Trump says she is excited to educate herself on the issues facing children throughout the continent. More than 170 migrants and refugees remain stranded on a ship off the coast of Sicily. The Italian government refused to let them dock in the country until other European countries agreed to take them. Rome asked Malta to take the group, but the country refused. Recent U.S. sanctions on Iran have left neighboring Iraq in a tough position. Iraq does a large amount of business in the country, but if it continues, it could be a breach of those sanctions. Iran is Iraq's third biggest trading partner after Turkey and China. The Taliban fires a pair of rockets towards the presidential palace in Kabul, Afghanistan. The attack happened as the country's president was delivering his holiday message for the Muslim celebration of Eid al-Adha. 2 police officers were slightly wounded. The area where the rockets hit is one of the most secure in the Afghan capital. And Muslims in Kosovo gathered at a central mosque today for celebrations on Eid. The Muslim holiday is known as the Day of Sacrifice, with faithful attending morning prayers and slaughtering a sheep for the poor. Kosovo's 1.8 million population is predominantly Muslim with a small Catholic community. Coming up, President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, is back on Capitol Hill today. Jason Calvi has the latest. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh says he agrees that Roe v. Wade decision on abortion rights is settled law. That's according to Senator Susan Collins. The Republican from Maine is a key swing vote in his nomination. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason?
Wyatt, Senator Collins and Judge Kavanaugh met right here on Capitol Hill. She supports abortion and has promised to oppose any nominee who's hostile to Roe v. Wade. Her vote is key since Republicans have a narrow 50-49 majority here in the Senate, and they can't afford a single defection on Kavanaugh if every Democrat votes no. Brett Kavanaugh's meeting today could be a deal breaker or a deal maker. The 53-year-old D.C. appeals court judge already met most Republicans. Today he's huddling with undecided GOP Senator Susan Collins of Maine.
Nice to meet you.
Collins says during their 2-hour meeting, they talked at great length about Roe v. Wade.
Judge Kavanaugh and I had an excellent session. It was very productive. It was very informative. We covered a wide range of issues, and I look forward to his upcoming hearings in the Judiciary Committee.
Collins says the Supreme Court nominee is qualified, but she's facing pressure from pro-abortion groups targeting Kavanaugh.
We know where he stands. Everybody on that list has been pre-vetted to be anti-choice.
But some Democrats do make those blanket statements.
This Supreme Court nominee, Judge Kavanaugh, is going to destroy women's reproductive freedom. We already know this about him. President Trump told us that anyone from his list would be there specifically to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Kavanaugh should expect these tough questions during his confirmation hearing. It begins September 4th. If confirmed, the 53-year-old would be the 6th Catholic on the court. Kavanaugh is expected to meet later this month with Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska. Both Collins and Murkowski support abortion, and their votes are crucial. Many Democrats have already said they would oppose Kavanaugh. Republicans hope to have him confirmed by the start of the court session, October 1st. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. The retired Bishop of Callao, Peru, has died. Bishop Miguel Irizar Campos was ordained a priest in 1957 and spent more than 50 years serving the church. That included 17 years ministering to indigenous people. He was 84 years old. Up next, a new lawsuit filed against the Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple on religious grounds. And inside the oldest active parish in Nevada. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Vatican official has encouraged an Ohio prosecutor to go to confession after defying the Catholic Church's new policy that the death penalty is never acceptable. Paul Mueller, a vice director at the Vatican Observatory, wrote a letter to Hamilton County Prosecutor Joe Dieters saying he scandalized Dieters would use his office to oppose and confuse the teachings of the Church. A Colorado baker who declined to make a custom wedding cake for a gay couple on religious grounds is back in the spotlight. In June, the Supreme Court upheld Jack Phillips' right to refuse the couple based on the First Amendment. Days later, in another case, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission ruled that Phillips discriminated against a transgender person for refusing to bake a cake celebrating that person's transition from a male to female. Now Phillips is suing Colorado, saying the state again violated his freedom of religion. Joining me now is Mr. Phillips' attorney, Jeremy Tedesco, Senior Counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom. Jeremy, why is Jack Phillips having to fight this battle again? I mean, didn't the Supreme Court already rule in its favor and it's settled?
It's because Colorado didn't get the message the first time around. I mean, unbelievably, less than a month after the Supreme Court said that Colorado had targeted Jack Phillips because of his religious beliefs, Colorado turns around and does it again and accepts a complaint finds probable cause to pursue Jack Phillips and prosecute him again because he declined a request because of his religious beliefs. And the important thing that people need to understand about Jack is that he serves everybody that comes into his shop. There's just certain cakes he can't create. And in this instance, it was a message he couldn't celebrate through his cake design work, and he just declined to do it like he does in many other circumstances.
How strong or how weak is Colorado's case in your view?
Well, I think it's just incredibly weak. They just lost at the Supreme Court, 7-2, saying you can't be hostile to people of faith in this society. And you were specifically hostile to Jack Phillips because of his religious beliefs. And they turn around and go after him again because of his religious convictions and how he operates in the context of his business. So, Jack declines orders all the time. Anti-American cakes, Halloween cakes, cakes that disparage others. He declines cakes on a routine basis where people ask him to create cakes disparaging LGBT persons, cakes that celebrate divorce. So Jack is consistent, and he's not going to create cakes that celebrate ideas or promote messages that violate his beliefs, and that's what this was.
It's incredible to think that he's going through this again. It seems like Jack Phillips, as you say, is being targeted. Should religious Americans who own businesses in general, whatever their religious conviction may be, should all of them be concerned?
Absolutely, everybody should be concerned. And, he is being targeted because of his religious beliefs. There's no question about it that Colorado would turn around only less than a month after losing at the Supreme Court and target him again. But it's not just people of faith. Here's the thing, civil liberties travel together. So a government that's hostile to our religious freedoms is going to be hostile to our other civil liberties as well. Our right to free speech, our right to free exercise of religion, our right to peacefully assemble and dispute what the government thinks is the right policy. And so we all should be concerned that the government is this overtly hostile to religious beliefs, because inevitably, if the government is not held in check, we're going to see even more restrictions on other liberties that we care about.
Colorado ruled against Phillips just days after the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. What does that say about the state's commitment to religious freedom and respect for the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it shows they have no tolerance for people like Jack Phillips. I mean, the message of the Supreme Court was people like Jack Phillips with those kind of convictions need to be respected and tolerated in our society. And Colorado turned around and came after him less than a month after losing at the Supreme Court on exactly that issue. So Colorado is certainly not a friendly atmosphere for people of faith. And the Supreme Court even said in its opinion, people of faith have a right to bring their beliefs into the marketplace. And Colorado was wrong to close the marketplace off to people because of their religious convictions. And so Colorado may have to learn this lesson again. Jack has turned around this time and sued the state rather than being pulled back into the administrative process that he was pulled through for 6 years. Last time, all the harassment and everything that he experienced, he just wants to get on with his life, but Colorado won't let him.
Well, let me ask you this then, Jeremy, noting that, what are the next steps here?
Well, we've filed the complaint in federal court. We're going to ask the court to enjoin the state from continuing its current prosecution of Jack Phillips, and ultimately to rule that he does have a First Amendment right to decline requests that ask him to create messages that violate his beliefs. Everyone has this right. All creative professionals, whether they're religious or not, have a right to say, this is a line I won't cross. This is a message I won't promote through my work. And Jack is fighting for that freedom right now again against the state of Colorado, even though he just won a 7-2 decision against the Supreme Court, saying that religious hostility has no place in our society.
Such an important case and one that we will continue to follow. Jeremy Tedesco, Senior Counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, our partners at the National Catholic Register highlight the oldest active parish in Nevada. St. Mary in the Mountains Church serves the mountainside town of Virginia City, southeast of Reno. This month, parishioners celebrated the church's 150th anniversary. The parish has a museum and attracts up to 50,000 visitors a year. One little boy recently called it God's Castle. To read more about the church and its deep history, visit ncregister.com. Looks like an interesting place for a pilgrimage as well. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.